Welcome to Global Chats. We discuss money, we discuss people, we discuss trends, we discuss politics, we discuss religion, lifestyle, travels, everything. And this time, I'm bringing someone that you like to listen to. Patrik Jansson, a Swedish citizen who went to Tanzania for the first time in his life, and that was the first time he was traveling outside Europe. He's giving us a bit of what he experienced there, the life, the people, things to remember. As a global citizen, he is now involved in Global Chats. Please join us in this conversation. Welcome, Patrik.
Thank you.
To our show. But this time we want to hear from you about your exposure to the world. I know you're a global citizen. You travel so much. And I understand you went to Tanzania like 2 years ago. We want to hear from you. What was your first impressions of the place? What memories you have? I think that was the first time you ever went to Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. So the viewers would like to hear from you. But before we start, who is Patrik? Please.
Well, I am just an ordinary guy, I'd say, in the long run. I work as a coordinator, managing in a, for non-profit organization, and I'm a global citizen. Like to learn about the world, the differences between people, to learn from each other. That kind of person. And I went to Tanzania in 2021. I was there approximately 3 weeks. And I think the first thing that just touched me when I was landing there was how different it looked just geographically from any other place. But mind you, as you mentioned, before I went to Africa, I've only been to Europe. I technically been to Turkey, which was Asia, but it felt pretty European still. So I'd say that what first struck me was just the environment, how alien it looked, like in a good way, of course. The geography, the trees, the ground, they look very, colorful in that sense. And just in general, the vibe of people, like the easiness to communicate was also a bonus. I think that if I have to say anything with the people, it was like there was no one was hiding anything from me. It was straightforward to like asking me who is this person, who am I as a person, a human being, so to say. So quite a huge country. We travel a lot.
Which places did you go to?
Well, we landed in Arusha, so we were like around the Kilimanjaro area at first. And we went to Bukoba in the Kagera region. We went pretty rural there. And that was quite an interesting experience to see this village life. People who generally go by day to day just, like you were done 100 years ago almost. Like there was no internet, there was no TV, no YouTube, no Google, anything like that. People were like cutting their meat in front of them on huge leaves. They had like a local store with just like things that you really, really needed. No brands, no specific, And it was just like, it was meat, it was spice, it was all those good stuff. That was certainly like going back in time almost.
Tell us about the village, the name, the people, and the first ever experience.
Yeah, the village was called Rwanda, and it was just this very remote place, but still 2-3 hours with car from Bukoba, the main city in the region. And Bukoba was still a pretty modern city. You will have these.
That must have been a very slow car. Yeah, of course. Okay.
We were traveling with like 6-8 people in one car, so probably we were drinking some time and
having fun.
The same. Like it was a wedding. So, a lot of cars were going.
Oh, yes. Then if it was the wedding, it means there was a slow motion.
Exactly. And I think they wanted us to see the scenery as well.
Yeah.
A lot of rolling hills, like very hilly place. And as I said, we went from Bukoba to the village. So Bukoba was still a fairly modern city. You had like buildings, you had hospitals, you had convenience stores, all that stuff. But when you get from this place to this 3-hour drive to this village, whole other world. And when we came there, me and my friend, we were the only white people there. We were treated like we came from another planet. The villagers came out, they were running around the car.
How many were you? The white people?
2.
Okay.
And the people there were like 500
Both
more.
Swedish?
Yeah, we're both from Sweden, yes.
Okay.
And we were just getting all this attention, like touch our hair, see us. So we were really celebrities in that sense.
Tell us about the food or the drinks.
Oof, the food. So there was, you eat a lot with the hands, of course. So there will be a lot of, you pick kind of what you like. They had a huge buffet almost. And it was like meat, matoke, I believe it was cassava, there was beans, and like a lot of variety. Of course, vegetables, all kinds of, I think it was a soup as well, and a huge feast. And it was clear from everything that it was a certain special occasion. Normally they wouldn't do these kind of things, but for this time it was for a wedding. It was a specific person I was there to meet. I was there as a guest to represent my own country, my own culture. Had a speech, by the way, completely in Swahili. Now, I don't know Swahili myself, but I've been practicing a bit before I went, of course, but I also practiced the speech. And I believe it went through with tremendous cheers.
What about the dances and the music?
Oh, there's videos of that, let me tell you. But of course, like I think we were actually in the village 2 times. The first time was before the wedding, so it was like a kind of a pre-party. Okay. And when that is when we kind of came and we were treated like celebrities. And as soon as you got out, it was just dancing completely. We drank this local drink, I believe it was called...
It must have been Rubisi.
Yeah, exactly. There was a homebrew. Really, not the best taste,
but there's this brown one, and there's this the tough liquor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hope you tasted both.
Yeah, it was tough to consume, but it did its job. I say so. And that's close to what we have in my home country, to homebrew, but this one was like of a much more earthy, raw taste that I have not been too familiar with.
It's natural.
Yeah. So a lot of it was, as I mentioned it before, like living with nature, and that's really stood out with the whole trip to the village there. Never ever seen some other location like that in my life before.
But knowing Patrik as a global citizen, I'm sure you must have known something about Tanzania before you went there.
Of course, I know things about rural life in most countries, but I never experienced it. You see, like reading things or seeing it on television or YouTube is a different matter, because it's like you're watching a movie in that sense, you're seeing other people do another activity. But doing it yourself is a completely different experience. And seeing it for yourself is a very different experience. So I feel like, in that sense, it felt like I was experiencing something that I've only ever seen on the screen before. And seeing it in real life just made it even more fantastic to see that people live like this and they're happy about it.
But what impression did you get from what you previously knew about Africa and what you are now then experiencing physically? How do we compare?
I mean, I have a lot of African friends here in Sweden myself, so I believe, as opposed to maybe other Swedes, I had a pretty good impression of how African life was from them. But I'd say that the biggest one was like a lot of day-to-day life was taking us like a very easygoing pace. Here in Sweden, people are quite stressed about reaching deadlines or coming on time or just appearing busy most of the time. While there, it was never really like that. Like, no matter how much it was time to get to a certain spot, like they got there in time somehow. Like time is relevant, I would say. That is what I noticed the most. Like they didn't really take scheduling and time to the same extent as maybe we would do here in Sweden, for example. Being late would be a huge offense here, but there, not at all. So I think like the easygoing day-to-day life, which I've gotten a bit used to from my work friends and my other friends from Africa here in Sweden, but to see it on a whole other scale, and that the people were happy. Like they didn't have much. Most people I saw on the street would just either be going from to or from work or home, or they'll be living quite modest lives. But when I talked to them or like interacted with them, they didn't seem to have any problems with that, because they were happy with what they were doing, and that was admirable.
Okay. Now from Bukoba, where else do you go?
So after Bukoba, we took the boat to Mwanza, and so we went through the Lake Victoria. That was also quite something that me and my traveling buddy wanted to do.
Night-long trip, eh?
Exactly, because we wanted not to just take another plane or another bus. Mind you, we had a lot of bus rides, but we wanted to travel for the boats that the British had established by that point. So we traveled this very old Victoria area boats. Of course, it was not the most pleasant ride, I have to say that, but I've never been in a boat of that nature before. Like, we have boats between Sweden and Finland in my home country, but they're very, very luxurious, very big, very fancy. What fascinated me with this one is that it was a real authentic boat from like 100 years ago. It had the same names, it had like the British symbols on it, and that felt like traveling through history a bit. So even though it was not the most like comfortable ride, it certainly was an amazing experience.
So what exactly did you do on the boat? Were you touring the boat? Were you sleeping? Were you in the restaurant drinking? Were you dancing somewhere? What exactly was your experience on the boat from Bukoba to Mwanza?
Well, there was not a lot of time to dance, because we traveled quite late in the night. There was entertainment on it, so that we were on the upper deck. There you can have like drinks or snacks, or you had a DJ playing songs and those kind of things. But I think at that time, both me and my partner were quite tired. I myself did on my own tour. Like, there were no guide showing us around the boat, but I took my own time to like go up and down, because we had the upper deck tickets, so we had quite a nice accommodation for that kind of trip. Okay. But I wanted to go down to where people were like doing the lower deck kind of things, and they had their stuff with them. There was a lot of people bringing like backpacks and even animals, like chickens, and I think I even saw a goat, if my memory is not too bad. Okay. So that was quite interesting. Yes, indeed. I don't think I've ever taken as many pictures as I did on this trip in my life. As I said, like, it was quite a different world than I've ever seen from Europe. So, and anything that stood out, I had to capture with my camera. So yeah, we took that boat to Mwanza. Okay. We spent a couple of days in Mwanza. Mwanza was quite different from Bukoba in that sense, that it felt a bit more international.
Yeah, because Bukoba is a town and Mwanza is a city. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we saw a lot more Europeans there, for example. A lot more nightlife, and it was I'd say Mwanza stood out to me mainly because it had all these. It felt like a city among mountains, because you had the Lake Victoria, but then you also had the mountains all around it, and it kind of felt like a city I'd never really seen before in that sense. Like, it felt like it was one with nature in that sense. And to be fair, the other cities with that too. I will get to that eventually. I visited more than just Bukoba and Mwanza and Arusha, but out of all those towns, I think like Mwanza had their own flair.
Any striking feature in Mwanza that keeps coming to your memories?
Yeah, the mountains, like the houses on the mountains, cliffs, because they have those mountains around the lake that you can see from far away. It looked a bit like Los Angeles, but with an African flair. So it always made me, sometimes short glimpses of me would be like, am I in California or am I in the US? But then, of course, I smelt it, I felt it, like, oh, it's Africa. But that had a very unique sense to me.
Okay.
Once we went to Iringa and then Dodoma. Okay. So Iringa was interesting because I always pictured Africa as a hot place, and certainly it was. Me and my friend, we were packing just normal T-shirts and shorts and all that stuff. But as soon as we reached Iringa, it got really cold. Like not as cold as it could get in my home country. So it's not like it was shocking in that sense. But to be in Africa and all of a sudden you have 14 degrees coming up to you, I had to go and buy a warmer sweater because that wouldn't cut it. So Iringa was certainly, it had a very European flair in that sense. Mm-hmm. According to my guide, there's a lot of Europeans who live there in Tanzania because of the cooler climate. So that even though it might be in the middle of the summer, there's still a bit of cold.
Did you meet some Europeans there?
We went to a hotel. Of course, we had some accommodation there from some other people, but apparently this is a hotel that the Europeans go to. There was a lot of white people that either enjoy their own vacation, going up to safaris, or were living there, like day to day, like we're paying to be in that hotel for a long term. Yeah, I went to Dodoma after that. Dodoma was it felt very fresh in that sense that it felt like all the buildings were very, very new. And but there was not much to do there. Like they had the parliament, they had the big university and the hospital, and they had a huge skyscraper which had a bar on top of it. But there was not much activity there, as I saw in all the other cities I mentioned. Of course, I was with a friend there.
When exactly was that? In which months of the year?
That was probably in August or September, something like that.
Yeah, during those times you don't expect much activity in Dodoma because by that time there's no parliament in Dodoma. So activities are a bit slower and lower and fewer. Okay.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So that was but of course the friend I was staying with had her own vineyard, for example, that produced wine. So it was the first time I tasted African wine. I didn't even know they made it.
You mean the Dodoma wine?
The Dodoma wine, precisely. Okay. So we went to see the vineyard, the orchard, and of course the geography around the Dodoma was quite fascinating. It was like huge plains with a couple of rocks here and there. Looked a bit like if you ever seen those old cartoons of, they have those huge mountains. It's quite fascinating. From Dodoma we eventually went on a very long bus ride to Dar-es-Salaam. Okay. And Dar-es-Salaam, I didn't get to wander out about it too much because it's so big. We mostly traveled it through car, but it was certainly one of the biggest cities I've ever been to in my life. I've been to London, which is probably bigger in that sense, but it felt bigger than London because the urban sprawl was from here to there, and you could get lost very easily. We were driving around the city, and I felt like we were just driving around the same buildings over and over again.
Because they look alike.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, towards the harbor front, we saw all the skyscrapers. And skyscrapers is not something we generally have a lot in Europe. And having so many at the same spot was new to me as well. Don't think I've ever been anywhere except maybe London where they have skyscrapers of that. In Stockholm, for example, we have no skyscrapers. We have tall buildings, but we don't have skyscrapers. Okay. So that was also quite interesting to see. It felt very American almost. And from Dar-es-Salaam, we went on a boat trip to Zanzibar. And Zanzibar felt very touristy, very European as well, because I never seen as many white people in my entire trip as I saw there.
You mean your entire trip to Tanzania?
Yeah, in the entire trip to Tanzania. So I went from the remote village up in Kagera, where we were the only people they've ever seen that were white probably, to Zanzibar, where whites were quite fairly common and English was quite easy to talk. Everyone knew it. They were all used to tourists. They even spoke more languages there than just English because they get tourists from Germany, Spain, Italy. They will speak their languages to get to know them a bit. But as a city, of course, a fan of history, Zanzibar was just filled with things to see, like old mosques, bathhouses from the Sultan area, colonial buildings, Freddie Mercury's home where he was born. the smells and the flavors of the food there as well. You know, I think Zanzibar, as a fan of history, that was probably my highlight of the trip, in just historical sites.
How much time did you spend in Zanzibar?
It was 2 days. Well, it was two full days. So we went there in the morning of a day, and we slept a night, and then we went in the afternoon. So certainly could use a bit more time there, I would say. It is a tiny island, but there's so much to experience and see. So Zanzibar is definitely on my return to if I would ever go back.
I know you love history. You must have seen more historical sites in Tanzania than Zanzibar and just Bukoba and Iringa.
Well, of course, we went to the old colonial building for when the Germans controlled it, Bagamoyo. So that was the capital before they made it to Dar-es-Salaam. And that city, of course, was important before the Germans came as well. But when it comes to like indigenous history, when we were in Iringa, we visited the place where the Maji rebellion was active. When the Germans tried to colonize Tanganyika at the time, these parts were like actively fighting back to stop them. So you could see the items that they used in the local village life, the chief, how they fought back, and even the skull of the rebel leader. I assume you would remember his name. Yeah, exactly. So the actual skull that was his, which you're not allowed to take photos of. So when you're there, make sure to memorize it in your brain. So they had those areas as well. So it's a beautiful, beautiful place because it's not many people that go there for that reason.
I know, it looks like you saw many places in a very short span of time, more than ordinary tourists do. So, okay, tell us a little bit about what you knew before you went to Tanzania and what you really experienced from Bukoba, Mwanza, Dodoma, Iringa, Zanzibar, Bagamoyo, Dar-es-Salaam. Did what you knew before match with what you really saw and experienced?
Because I knew the facts that you can research yourself, but I didn't know, of course, the feel and the authenticity of it. To actually talk and experience things that you never talked to or experienced in your life before. I don't think I've gotten remotely close to those kind of things, because you can read a lot about things. You can have a lot of assumptions and a lot of predetermined ideas about things. But when you're actually there yourself, you don't really realize how real it can be, And I think that the reality of it was what really hit me a lot, that, these people are human beings like me, but they live very different lives than me. Of course, I try to live my life as easygoing as I can, but that was mostly interested in me, how people were quick to know you and they were quick to befriend you. And that is quite different from where I come from, because here it can take a long time to get to know someone on that level, because it's almost like you have to have a checklist of things you have to do before you know someone. But there it was more like, let me know you now, because you're here in front of me. Let me know who this person is, who is this individual I'm talking to, and that stays with me a lot. And you can't really research that in any sense. You can only experience it.
You have to experience it physically. But no, if someone has to ask you, just for the sake of curiosity, in other places that you visited and the people you met, what particular thing in each place that you think you can remember about that place, like Bukoba? What one or two things you can remember? Zanzibar, 2, 3, or 5, or 1. Specific things that can make you recall the moment and the people in that particular place.
Yes, Arusha, it has to be Mount Kilimanjaro. Strikes me, this is almost the first thing I saw when I came off the airport. It's just such a magnificent piece of natural wonder. Bukoba, I would say, like, just the rural feel of it, that, there was no asphalt on the road, it was, sand roads, and people were going by mainly by walking, or they had those little small bikes that they would ride. Of course, being close to Lake Victoria as well.
Did you happen to ride one of those bikes?
Yeah, you did.
Picky.
Yeah, twice actually. And the first time I was holding on quite tightly. But the second time I felt like it's quite easy to sit on actually. It was quite enjoying. Mm-hmm. And of course with the village I went to, Rwanda village, it was quite, I already talked in depth about how unique it looked, like going back in time.
Yeah.
I remember how they were cutting the meat on like pieces of leaves right in front of me, and they were cooking it in front of me, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
One side has to be the mountainsides along with the lake, this California kind of feeling, but with an African flair. Iringa, the cold, I had to say, the freezing cold.
It's surprising for the Swedes to be talking about the cold in Tanzania.
Yeah, when you're coming from Mwanza where it was like 30 degrees and then you go to Iringa where it's 14, it's that contrast, So, yeah. Dodoma has to be the open plains around the city and of course the emptiness of it a bit. But as you said, it's a capital, so if it's during the busy season, it will probably be a bit more activity. Yes. Dar-es-Salaam, skyscrapers and just the sheer size of it. And so many different types of cars and buildings and smells and tastes. Zanzibar, of course, the stone town, the historical aspect of it. It looks like a Swahili town, a traditional town. Okay. You can get back in time and just imagine it 200 years ago.
Yes. Bagamoyo?
I always see the Bagamoyo as a bit like Zanzibar in that sense that it had that kind of historical flair to it. But of course, what I remember mostly from Bagamoyo was, of course, the first time in my life that I saw the Indian Ocean. Because, mind you, I had never been to the Indian Ocean before, so I made doubly sure to touch the water, to see it, to sink it in. And at that time it was low tide, so you could walk pretty far out. So I'd say I walked on the Indian Ocean, and I like to make that known to people.
What type of entertainment did you get from those places that you can remember?
Good food. Especially the fish and the meat and the music. We went to a lot of bars, and live bands was quite a common thing there. They will have people who are playing either traditional music or jazz or something like that, and it really made you feel like the place was alive and vibrant. So we did a lot of those kind of activities. We went on a boat ride when we were in Zanzibar to see the water. Safari, watched all the big 5 animals.
Where exactly?
It was Ruhua, which is...
Ruaha.
Yeah, Ruaha, yeah, sorry. I always had a hard time saying that one.
Okay,
and apparently it is the biggest safari in Tanzania to size. So that one was interesting, and while we were there also, of course, we went to the middle part of the park where it was the main station for the rangers, and that one kind of felt like a town in itself because you had a convenience store there too, and you had a rest area and things like that. So we did a lot of safaris, a lot of markets. We went to the markets to shop, haggling, all these kind of very cheap kind of products that would be expensive here in Sweden, but there it was a bargain, even though they were a bit of haggling going around, which is just a part of the fun. Having some fruits, I believe we had a couple of, what are they called, coconuts was quite popular.
Okay. There is a feeling that many Europeans, or say many foreigners to Tanzania, before they reach there, they have a feeling of going to meet animals, those things. Now you're back from there. Is that the same feeling you have?
More or less. I mean, there's always more additionally to what people expect. I think when it comes to Swedish people's perspectives, I feel like, of course, the things that are true is, of course, there are a lot of animals of that, zebras, giraffes, lions. But I also feel like there's a lot of poverty that they expect to see, but might not be at the same level. A lot of people, especially maybe my grandmother's age, would think of Africa as an extremely poor place where they're not even getting enough food. I believe when I came back from Tanzania, my grandmother, who unfortunately now has passed on, asked me about the trip. And she's a very global citizen herself. Like she talks to her immigrant neighbors, learning their food and their recipes, like very open-minded person. And she was very fascinated about my trip, asking about the animals, asking about the sights. But she also asked me if I had enough food while I was there. And of course, I think that is part of her perspective, that she probably thinks that
You are starving there.
yeah, but that's not really the case. Like I think I never had as much food as I ever had while I was there, because it was so available everywhere. So I think those are kind of the perspectives I think a lot of Swedes and or your Europeans will have, that they think that it's extremely poor. And of course it's not as rich as you may find here in Sweden, but it's rich in many other things. And I don't really think they see it as poor. I think they see
So I
it
think
as...
that puts a blame on the media then, because of what we expose of Africa to the world. Because if the world thinks Africa is poor when we are not that poor, it means there's something that is properly not portrayed in a proper perspective.
Overall, I'd say yes, but I also will think that maybe it's just not getting updated, because, for example, with my grandmother, she would learn about this when she was a young kid in the 40s and 50s. And in the 40s and 50s, there was huge problems all over Africa with poverty. But that has changed in the last 50 years. So I feel like they kind of have an old school, non-updated version of not just Africa, but like Asia as well, South America as well, that you kind of assume, but I feel like they don't really portray things as they should portray. And as I said, like I feel that's a misconception that needs to change, because it is not a poor place. It is actually like a happy place.
Very good. What major difference did you notice in all those places you visited compared to where you have been in the world?
Of course, as I talked about, it's a lot of different kind of geography and a lot of fields and just the overall look of the nature there. I was quite shocked about how much trash there was on the ground, though. Like not just like bottles, but any kind of item that you would throw normally go to your trash can, but was all up on the field. And apparently that seems to be a problem all over the country. I saw it no matter what city I was in. And that's very, very, very different from here in Europe, where trash on the ground is very rare, and if it is usually removed within a day or two. So that was quite surprising. But other than that, of course, the food and the culture and the environments were very new to me, and they felt fresh.
That speaks volumes in regards to the way we take care of our environment. I think we need to raise the awareness on how we should take care of this. Is that the message you're trying to send? Yeah,
I think so, because we all have to take our responsibility in this world, and I just feel like it looks nicer and it feels nicer for us within ourselves to just take care of the nature and the environment that we're living in.
How easy was it for you to plan a trip to Africa?
I think the planning is not as long as it could have been, because to just book the tickets and go was fairly easy. What took a lot of time, of course, the COVID was very much active at this time. So to prepare all the tests for the flights made it probably longer than it needed to be, because you had to do the test before you went on a plane. When you arrived at the airport, you have to do a test again, wait for the results. While we were traveling there, I was checking my own temperature to make sure I was feeling all right. But as it comes to costs and things like that, the plane tickets were probably the most expensive part of the trip, and the safaris. They pay more for us Europeans to use them. But I think the biggest issue was the COVID, because people were asking me, why are you traveling now? Is this a risky thing? But of course, some of my family members were concerned that it was Africa. They were thinking, it might be robbed or things like that. And I was telling them, it's not really going to be an issue. So of course, I was also privileged in the sense that I knew people there who can meet me at the airport they speak Swahili. They can communicate if I cannot communicate with them. So
did you have time to practice Swahili before you went there?
a bit, but as I already knew I was going to have some people there, I didn't practice to the extent where I could hold a conversation. But I did learn quicker while I was there, of course, because I needed to. When I didn't have my guide around, my friend there, I couldn't speak. So, and that was also quite fascinating and a big shock for me, because before I came to Tanzania, I actually thought that English was a much bigger spread because it's an official language. So I was quite shocked how little they knew.
Yes, it's an official language, but it's the least used.
Yeah. So that was also shocking to me, that they knew so little English. I always assumed that they spoke English at least to an extent where I can have like very basic conversations, but that only really happened in touristy places or.
No, maybe that's because you met so much in the villages where they don't speak English.
They didn't in Mwanza, or they didn't speak it in Dar-es-Salaam either. So
maybe it depends on the people you met and the places they took you to.
Most likely.
Because,
most likely.
Yes, it's not the language you speak often, but we are fairly an English-speaking sort of. Especially if you're in a city, you should be able to meet people who speak English. Yeah. Any friends there?
We were in Mwanza. We went to the national park there called Sanane, yeah. And we befriended the guy there. He was very good English speaker, and he's been into the US and those things. So we exchanged phone numbers and communications.
Does he call you?
No. But we still, write occasionally.
Okay.
And of course, I met a guy called Simon, a nice person. He lived in Dar-es-Salaam, but he was with us for some parts of in the Zanzibar trip, and he took us to Bagamoyo.
Okay.
So he might have quite a good connection too. Of course, my guide Mary, who was with me the entire trip. Without her, we would not be able to travel so far and like reach as many places. And I intend to take her to my home country as well. So, as I said, it's easy to form connections there. So there's a lot of other people I met that I would like to see again. So too many to name here.
From what you're telling me, it looks like you're planning another trip to Tanzania.
Yes.
How soon?
Sooner than later.
Very nice. So happy to have you, Patrik.
Thank you so much.